The chief executive of car giant Mercedes has warned that Europe's motor industry could collapse unless the EU changes its mind on banning new combustion engine vehicles. Ola Kallenius says that if a ban on petrol and diesel cars remains in place for 2035, Europe's automotive industry could implode. But will EU leaders listen to the Mercedes boss? The chief executive of car giant Mercedes has warned that Europe's motor industry could collapse unless the EU changes its mind on banning new combustion engine vehicles. Ola Kallenius says that if a ban on petrol and diesel cars remains in place for 2035, Europe's automotive industry could implode. But will EU leaders listen to the Mercedes boss?
For decades, car production has been Europe's industrial strength. But sales across Europe have been declining since 2017. Weak market demand, tariffs and global competition are impacting the future of Europe's automotive sector, which accounts for around 7% of the EU's GDP. Adding to its problems are plans by Brussels to phase out the production of combustion engine cars by 2035, part of its ambitious aims to become the first climate-neutral continent. German car giant Mercedes is warning of dire consequences for the industry if this goes ahead. In an interview with the German business newspaper Handelsblatt, its chief executive Ola Kallenius said, "We need a reality check, otherwise we are heading at full speed against a wall. Of course, we have to decarbonise, but it has to be done in a technology-neutral way. We must not lose sight of our economy." The EU's 2035 ban is not set in stone and is scheduled for review in the coming months. But the Mercedes boss isn't the only industry leader to warn of the pitfalls of the EU's plans. BMW chief Oliver Zipse also told the Paris Motor Show last year the ban could also threaten the European automotive industry in its heart. The measures will, with today's assumptions, lead to a massive shrinking of the industry as a whole. So what will be the fate of Europe's car industry? And will Europe's lawmakers change their minds?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say, joining me here in the studio, we have Lars Sexton. Lars is a former racing car driver. In Newbury, in Berkshire in England, is Kevin Gaskell. Kevin is chairman of race car manufacturer Radical Motorsport and a former CEO of Porsche, BMW and Lamborghini. In Berlin, we have Ben Aris. Ben is founder and editor-in-chief of IntelliNews. And joining us from Milan, we have the business journalist, Giulia Bottaro. You're all very, very welcome to this roundtable. Kevin, to you, first of all, heading at full speed against a wall. These were very strong words from the Mercedes boss. Is he right, or is he just scaremongering?
I think it's an emotional statement that you need to consider who he's aiming at. And I think he's aiming that full square at the legislators and at the politicians. You know, if the motor industry is going to move from internal combustion engine to fully EV powered vehicles, that's a 10-year transition as a minimum. And they need clarity, absolute clarity. So they cannot keep moving the goalposts. They cannot move the timelines. So he's saying, be clear with us. Stop moving the goalposts. Help us to focus on what the target is, and then we can organize ourselves to achieve it.
Ben, you're in Germany. How did those comments go down in a country with such a huge car manufacturing industry and Mercedes being such a part of the fabric, the DNA of the place?
Indeed. I mean, Germany's famous for its cars. Its leading products, BMW, Volkswagen, Porsche, you know, they're all household names and icons, poster boys for quality. But at the same time, Germany is having severe problems. It's suffering from an energy crisis and that it's slowly deindustrializing as part of the spillover effects of numerous different things. The most obvious one is the war in Ukraine, which has cut Germany off from its cheap gas that it used to import from Russia. But more generally, the former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has said that the massive underinvestment for several years, for decades even, has undermined its competitive advantage. And on top of that, you've got inflation pushing the costs up. And so the automotive industry is really in the front line here. It's facing rising costs, it's facing stagnant productivity growth, and most importantly, it's facing aggressive and rapidly expanding competition from China in particular, but not only. And so it's struggling to keep up. And we've already seen Volkswagen nearly shut down 2 plants in Germany for the first time ever. We've seen BMW talking to Mercedes about buying engines because it's got cost problems there. Connected to that the automotive sector is coming under increasing pressure and is struggling to keep up. And what they're doing here is calling for help from the legislators, to soften the terms, to give them some more space so that they can stay competitive in the market.
Thanks, Ben. Giulia, you're in the north of Italy, the powerhouse of the Italian economy. What's the feeling like about car manufacturing and where the industry is going right now in Italy?
I think it's feeling pretty similar than Germany. The Italian car market has been in a crisis for a long time. But there are some positive shoots from the increase in EV demand, both for plug-ins and battery electric vehicles. And so this is why I think that it's fair to keep the ban, and that's the direction of travel.
Thank you. Lars, to you, it seems that European policy perhaps wasn't massively thought out here, that they haven't got everything lined up that they needed, perhaps?
Yes, I would agree. You look at China, for example, and the government support that BYD have got. 2022, BYD stopped manufacturing internal combustion engine vehicles. So their focus has been purely on EVs, the manufacturing cost in China being about 30% cheaper. So it significantly puts them in a very strong place within the market.
And just tell me, Lars, business needs clarity. We're seeing lots of flip-flopping on policy. And, do you think we need senior leaders in the European Union to come out and just say, we're sticking to this or we're going to change? Because as I understand it, there's a review coming.
The financial implications of sticking with it potentially could be catastrophic for the European market. But we do need infrastructure. We've spoke about that before on previous roundtables. And Mohan Soldi did say, and he was very, very right from when I visited China, that the Chinese are just way ahead in terms of their infrastructure. So for me, it needs to be a whole package. The infrastructure, the vehicles, the clarity with the regulations, as per China have done.
Thanks, Lars. Kevin, 4 years ago, Mercedes said that they would stop selling internal combustion engines by the end of the decade. And they've now gone back on that. Clearly, they've realised that this is not as straightforward as everyone was thinking.
No, it's not as straightforward. I mean, you've got to remember that there have to be customers for these vehicles. And the latest surveys are suggesting that only about 60% of people really want to drive an EV. You've still got a 40% residual who don't want to drive electric vehicles for a whole host of reasons, not least of which is the infrastructure, the concern about longevity, concern about servicing costs. So manufacturers do have to keep an eye on the fact that they've got 40% of the market who don't want to move to electric vehicles. And what are they going to do to support those people? Are they going to drag them into electric vehicles or are they not? And it's very easy for legislators to say, listen, we're going to EV and that's it. And by the way, we're going to fine you, manufacturers, if you don't meet our quota. But that's a pretty negative approach. And yes, you do have Chinese players who are pure digital play, pure EV play. And that's fine because that's a new opportunity. But when you've got an established manufacturing base, and we've just heard from Ben what the challenges in Germany are, and they're no different elsewhere in Europe. When you've got an established manufacturing base, which has been building internal combustion engine vehicles for 100 years, the transition is very challenging. And so arbitrary timelines, whilst they are an encouragement, the politicians would say, they're not particularly helpful.
Kevin, can I just ask as well, your experience of leading major car manufacturing brands in Europe and across the world, how much does it frustrate you when you get policymakers who don't actually understand the industry, would not have worked at your level?
Massively. I mean, look, I live in the UK and I watch the UK government. There isn't one person around the cabinet table who's got business experience. Not one person. Can you imagine? And these people are supposed to be running the country. And I'm pretty apolitical. It's not whether it's socialist or conservative. It's have people around the table making policy, determining legislation, who actually understand what it takes to transition from one type of industry to another type of industry. It's a massive, massive transition, and I don't think they understand it. So it frustrates the heck out of me.
Thank you, Kevin. Ben, just looking at the numbers for the first 6 months of this year across the Europe, EVs account for just 17.5% of sales in Europe. Plug-in hybrids, 8.7%. I mean, these numbers are not good.
Well, they're not what they hoped for, and you have to contrast that to China, where EVs just overtook combustion engines, ICE cars, for the first time. And I think Kevin's point, he puts his finger on it, that people don't want to buy them, or at least not enough people want to buy them. And in that sense, I think the policymakers have sort of blundered into this. They've done two things wrong, in my opinion. One is to put a hard deadline, 2035, where they'll just ban combustion engines, and that gives manufacturers no wiggle room, no get out. And the second thing is that they decided to withdraw subsidies. Here in Germany, we had subsidies of about €4,500 if you were to buy an EV car, and those were ended in 2023. And you could argue that was done too early, because it also makes the EVs more expensive than the combustion engine cars. Whereas in China, you get good quality, high quality at a cheaper price than you do for a combustion engine. Whereas here in Europe, you're paying more for the for the EV than you would do for the combustion engine, which is a disincentive. And clearly, I think Europe is struggling to get to the same scales of economy that China has. And of course, the Chinese market is massive, so that one of the reasons why they can produce these cars very quickly at high quality is because they have such a large market. But the policymakers here have made it harder for the manufacturers to compete and to produce cheap EVs, because the limits on the size of the market, and that taking away that subsidy has just made it more difficult.
Thanks, Ben. Giulia, give us your impression of where the EV market is in Italy right now, the infrastructure. Are they seen as a desirable vehicle amongst Italian consumers?
I think yes and no. I think there is a lot of range anxiety still, but in the major urban centers, there's plenty of charging infrastructure. There is also a report from PwC that came out recently that found that in Q2, in the top 5 European markets, which includes Italy, sales of all electric vehicles went up by 25%. So I think there is demand. The government has some subsidies last year and just started new subsidies this year. So I think that is the way to go if you want to incentivize people. It's, as everybody has been saying, really a mix of things: subsidies, charging infrastructure, general support.
And Giulia, just on that point of the charging infrastructure, where you live near Milan, are there charging points at supermarkets, at petrol stations? I mean, how prevalent are they on the streets of your town?
I don't think they're massively prevalent, but I am from a small town, 30,000 people, so I don't think it's been prioritized. I think it would be nice if the city council prioritized it. I think it would be great if governments gave subsidies for people to put charging points at home, so they can charge a car overnight, for example, and it's ready to go the next day. One fascinating thing that I saw in my small hometown was that I saw a BYD car earlier this year, which I thought was a bit surprising because they're kind of new to the European market. But the fact that I see BYD cars here means that the Chinese brands are really making inroads everywhere.
Thanks, Giulia. Lars, just on that point, you've driven in China, you've driven the very best EVs in that country. How worried do you think European manufacturers should be with the quality of what you've seen and driven?
I think the best way I can answer that is, if I was going to get an ICE, internal combustion engine vehicle, I'm going to go Mercedes, BMW, all the normal brands, because in my mind, they're the guys that make the best ICE vehicles. If I'm going to go electric, though, I'm looking at BYD, NIO, Polestar, Chinese-owned, Tesla. So it's not just about China, it's America as well with Tesla. So they're the vehicles that I'm going to be looking at if I'm going to go to electric. I'm not really going to be looking at Mercedes if I want to go electric. Now, that may be just me and what's been sold, but for me, my experience in China, I was blown away by BYD and the Neo vehicles. Phenomenal.
Kevin, to you, when I think of all the amazing brands that I'd love to drive, they're all European. There's no Chinese manufacturer's name that jumps at me. The brands I'm thinking of, you've been CEO of all of them. I mean, the heritage, the luxury, the legacy of these vehicles for decades and decades, Europe is at risk here of losing all of that, isn't it?
I don't think it's a risk of losing all of it. I hear what Lars says about driving Chinese cars, and I agree with him. I think the key difference is on the price. You know, Mercedes and BMW produce some amazing electric vehicles now, but the price differential is substantial. And coming back to the point that was earlier about government subsidies, you know, the UK government announced subsidies a few weeks ago, but then they couldn't decide what they were going to apply them to. And so the legislators again confuse the market because they make an announcement and then they stop because they haven't thought it through and the market stops. But I think that European cars, the brand credibility is still enormous. The brand heritage is still something that people aspire to. And I think that some of the European brands will have great and fabulous and market beating electric vehicles. The key will be in the pricing because the Chinese cars are less expensive and that will attract the majority of the population.
So, Kevin, what's your reading of how much responsibility should European manufacturers bear then if the industry is, as the Mercedes CEO says, at risk of collapse? How much of this is on them or on the policymakers?
I think it's a mix. I think a lot is on the manufacturers. Look, I ran one of those brands when it was in deep, deep trouble, and the problems were internal. They were our problems. Our strategy hadn't been far enough out. We hadn't considered what the market was going to do to change. And I think that the manufacturers have had 10 years advance warning on this. This is not new. You know, electric vehicles have been around for a long time now. And so it's up to the manufacturers to sort their game out. But they do need stability in the marketplace. They do need the legislators to be clear about what is and what is not allowed.
Ben, to you, just how vital still is car manufacturing to the German economy?
Well, it's a diversified economy. However, it's a big employer, so it's an important part of the economy and politically also important. But if I can pick up on Kevin's point, I think there's one point we should touch on here is the question of technology and the fact that EVs have been around for 10 years. And I think the Europeans have been caught napping and haven't invested heavily enough into the EVs that they didn't really see this revolution coming, and it snuck up on them and now it's at the doorstep. And I point to the solar power industry, where China too embraced that. The solar panels were invented here in Germany in the 90s, companies like Qcell and Solar World. And it was a German thing, but the Chinese embraced it and threw everything at it. And their technology for the panels themselves are now world leading, but also in the manufacturing technology. That this is the other part of doing one of these industries. And I think China has run ahead, not only in the EV technology itself, but also in the manufacturing technology used to make those cars. And consequently, their prices are plummeting. And that makes them more and more competitive, both because they're offering high quality and they can do it at a cheaper price. And I think here in Europe, they've kind of ignored that. You know, it's been dominant. The European car manufacturers have been dominant for forever. And suddenly they're being attacked on a brand new market in a brand new niche where they haven't invested enough, and they find themselves falling behind now. And now they're in a rush to get it done. And we've got this hard deadline of 2035. And you'll notice that Kallenius from Mercedes, I mean, he was saying specifically the solution is not to get forces to change to EV engines, is to do, quote unquote, a technology neutral solution, which means that, you know, you can bring the emissions down by doing anything, by biofuels or turning to hydrogen, and so that you can exempt combustion engines and keep them. He's asking for more time. They need more time to invest and to catch up with the Chinese. And unfortunately, if you look at solar panels, the last companies went bust, the government looked at subsidizing them and decided, the German government decided that it lost the race and it just gave up, and that industry now is dead and it belongs in Germany and it belongs to the Chinese. And this is what Mercedes boss was talking about. This is the future that could be in store for the European auto sector unless it gets its act together now and really gets into the fight to catch up.
Thanks, Ben. Giulia, to you, do you think Italian consumers just care about price? And if there is a choice between, say, an Italian-made Fiat that is an EV or a Chinese EV that's maybe 5,000 euros cheaper, will they go for the better priced vehicle?
Oh, I think Italians are being crushed by inflation, job stagnation, a huge economic crisis that has lasted for decades. So I think price is very important. But I think on this point, if we saw the transition from a European perspective, from the perspective of energy security, for example, if we really go all in with the transition, so we do EVs, we do renewables, we really harness our local manufacturing base, our local opportunity for renewables. So, for example, solar power in Italy is massively underexploited. There is so much space for it, and yet we have to import most of our oil and gas. And so that translates to higher prices for people who drive petrol cars because they are dependent, they are victims, sort of thing, of the price swings of the oil market. So, I think from this perspective, if we look at what is best for consumers, I think in an ideal world, EVs powered by renewable electricity made in Europe.
Thanks, Giulia. Lars, just tell me, do you think one of the problems here is complacency in Europe, that European car manufacturers had it so good for so long because everyone wanted one of their vehicles?
Yes, and like Kevin was saying, a lack of clarity from the government. So if you look at the Chinese market, they have been focusing predominantly purely on EVs for a lot longer than the European market has. Subsequently, they're a lot further ahead. The worrying thing is potentially that I think 70% of all batteries for EVs are produced in China. So if you are the Chinese government, BYD, or the battery suppliers, you've kind of got some very strong deck of cards in your hand as the future does move further towards EVs.
Thanks, Lars. Kevin, final point to you. What would you be doing if you were CEO today of a major European car manufacturer and you had this problem facing you? Just give us your business plan.
Oh, my business plan is straightforward. We need to have a highly competitive EV strategy. We need to rip the cost out of our business. There's no holy cows. We have to take our business apart and put it back together again. And, that's challenging because we've got legislators, we've got employment law, we've got union power, all of those things. But, if you want to be here for the future, you've got to be agile, you've got to be low cost, and you've got to do it now. So I would have I would have had a program running for the last 5 years of doing exactly that. Agility, low cost, the best technology, and it's just the future. So I agree with what Ben said, that Mercedes are asking for more time, and let's consider neutrality on the kind of engine power train that we have. But the reality is EV is dominant and we need to be there.
And Kevin, do you worry then that we might just see some big names go to the wall in the next decade?
We already have. They're consolidating left and right. They're consolidating for defensive positions. So I think, when you've got some of the massive groups now and making huge losses every quarter, that's not sustainable. That is absolutely not sustainable. So yes, I do worry that some of the long-term players won't be around in 10 years' time.
And tell me, Kevin, ultimately, should we be welcoming someone like the boss of Mercedes, Ola Kallenius, coming out with a very strong interview? This will have been noticed in Brussels.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, he needs to stand up and shout. But so does the boss of Fiat, so does the boss of BMW, so does the boss of the boss of. These guys need to be clear because they've been on the receiving end of the legislators. They've been on the receiving end of flip-flopping on policy or flip-flopping on timescales. And they need to say, stop. Let's have a single approach here and let's do it together.
Ben, last question to you. We often see in the Premier League, someone will say that club is too big to go down, too big to be relegated and fail. Is Mercedes too big to fail?
No, of course not. It's like empires, empires rise and they fall as they become irrelevant. And if you lose touch with your feet off the ground, if you lose touch with the base, then you will just wither away. And that could happen to Mercedes. Like I said, I mean, it's got a fantastic brand. It's got a fantastic technology base. They have the wherewithal to stay in this game. But like I said, and in general, Europe has been underinvesting in technology and innovation, and they need to pull their finger out. And like Kevin said, break the business to pieces and rebuild it, and then focus on the EVs and come up with the same great solutions that they've done for the combustion engines. And that's within their power. But if they don't do it, if they continue just to stick to their traditional business, then they will end up progressively in a niche that's going to get smaller and smaller as the green revolution continues.
Ben, thank you. And to Kevin, Giulia and Lars Sexton here in the studio with me. Fascinating. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.